Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hey there, /x/. It's been a few years since I've been here, mostly because I stopped using the internet altogether for a long time. I recently experienced something that I thought might be of interest to you guys, though. You see, I'm a roofer, and I work for a contracting company that often sees employees come and go. Sometimes they're here on student visas, other times they just pick up and leave. There's around 10 or so guys that stick around, including myself. And then there's a few guys who will come and go, but they're mostly regular. One of these guys was a Belarusian dude named Shane. From the get-go, he was a pretty weird guy. He wore his sunglasses when it was cloudy and loved the hell out of Depeche Mode. I figured he was just a douchebag, and I was mostly right about that. We were working on this old barn one day. You know, the sort of barn that old rich people buy and then want renovated so they can house their expensive horses and junk. And Shane told me that back in Russia, he used to be a hitman. I'm only telling you this because he's the kind of guy who would just make up bullshit on the spot. Now one day, Shane and I were the last ones left at a spot, cleaning it up, throwing the cut-up old shingles in the dumpster, and basically cleaning up the property. It was grunt work, but I needed the overtime because my car had recently broken down. He sits down and starts telling me these really weird stories about his home life, back when he lived in Belarus. He told me about how he lived in abject poverty, so much so that his house was crawling with these huge rats. He said that one day he brought home a cat to try and kill them, and a giant rat dragged the cat behind the couch and ate the poor thing. He said that his baby sister was eaten by rats. However, he said it in such an offhand way that I'm not sure if I believed him or not. He sat there and told me about how his father would flatten out snakes under the ceramic tiles of their kitchen floor and then boil them only to throw them away. You get it. Basically just weird, messed up shit. Again, I'm not sure if I believe him, but a lot of it was too screwed up to be true. Shane said some other stuff too, but for time's sake, I won't type it up unless you're super interested for whatever reason. Anyways, so I'm riding back with him, because like I said, my car was dead. He's still blathering on about his horribly weird home life. Mind you, his car has trash everywhere in it. Old magazines, broken VHS tapes, a Superman lunchbox, old milk cartons. The back seat was pretty much unusable. Suddenly, he leans back there and says he wants to give me something. My house is small. I didn't need another thing in it. However, he insisted, like seriously, almost cried when I said that I didn't need another thing. Just to humor him, I was like, fine, just don't kill us. He gives me this box that's made of glass and all taped and glued together haphazardly. Now this is going to sound familiar to most of you. It's called a devil's box, which is part of the reason why I'm even putting this here. I thought it was sort of funny because it reminded me of all the time I spent on this board, thanked him, and got out of his god-awful smelling car. He drives off, I go make a meal for one and watch some trashy Fox show, and I don't see him for another couple days. My coworkers told me that the same night, Shane got up on a pool table and started swinging at ceiling fans with a broom in a bar. Pretty messed up behavior, but not unheard of. Apparently, he was pulling a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and thought there were bats there or something like it. Dude gets on the phone and does a 5150, which, if you're not familiar with legal codes, is basically the code for checking yourself into the loony bin. No big deal, though. He's back working 2 days later. This box, though, I put it on my sink under my medicine cabinet because I thought it would be funny because of Bloody Mary and whatnot. I thought about taking it apart. For some reason, I thought there might be weed in there or something. But for the sake of nostalgia, I kept it there beside my mouthwash. So when Shane and I are waiting for the company to pick up the dumpster on the last day of the job, he asks me if I kept the mirror box or not. I said, yeah, it's by my mouthwash, and he sort of laughed a bit nervously at that. He then goes on to tell me that he has mild fetal alcohol syndrome and schizophrenia, and not to listen to him much. Now, I don't know if you folks know anything about fetal alcohol syndrome, but usually when people have it, they look physically different. This guy didn't look like he had it at all, but I was so used to him lying at that point that I shrugged it off. I asked him if that meant I could throw away the piece of shit on my sink then. He starts shaking and tearing up. Now, mind you, a second ago, this guy was laughing and sweeping and pretty much fine, and says that his father gave it to him as a going-away gift. I'm like, fine, whatever. But I didn't let the dude give me a ride home that day. I walked a couple miles, then took a cab. After that, because he wasn't a regular worker, I didn't see him for a couple weeks. This is when things start getting a little strange, though. The box started to attract bugs. Like seriously, ants, flies. Not the small kind that you see in the city, but big, huge flies, centipedes. Even moths would gather to it at night, even though it didn't seem to emit any light. Now, I'm a roofer. I'm not the cleanest dude in the world, so I thought I would let it sit a little longer because I had become interested. For a while, I thought that maybe there was food in there or something, and I even entertained the idea of his dead baby sister being in the box or something stupid like that, right? But it didn't smell, at least not like food. You know how shoe shine smells? It smelled a little like that, but I figured it was just some weird Eastern European glue brand or something. Also, the damn thing started falling off my sink all the time. Now it would happen when there's a breeze or something. No poltergeist stuff. But it would happen with an alarming frequency. And it wouldn't break or show any sign of cracks either. I only have a small window in my bathroom, and all it would take was the gentlest breeze and the damn thing would be on the floor. It got kind of annoying, but then it started happening whenever I shut the bathroom door, or even opened a drawer in my bedroom, which was adjacent. At this point, I put it in the cupboard where I keep some of my tools, figuring that it would stop attracting bugs. The cupboard has a lock on it because one time some hoods broke in and stole my tools, so I'm a little paranoid about it. The next day, it's time for me to get my nail gun and my tool belt and everything else, and I open the cupboard. Wasps are everywhere. There's a nest and everything, which I guess I didn't notice before. I refused to believe it wasn't there until I put the box in, though. I raid the nest and go to work. My boss yells at me for being late, etc. I had fully intended on going home and taking apart the box that evening, or throwing it away. I'm not a super intelligent guy, or even particularly very worldly, so I knew that if I told anyone about this, they probably wouldn't believe me. So I waited for Shane to come to work again, like he always did after a couple of weeks, to tell him. I told him about the bugs, the wasps, how it fell, and he nodded and basically told me I was full of it. Shane wasn't looking so good, though. He was your basic Eastern European guy, dark hair, sort of big, not too muscular but broad in a way. I'm not sure, but I think he was a couple years younger than me. When he came back after those couple of weeks of being gone, he was really hunched over, and his stomach was all distended. He walked like he had an accident in his pants, and he had lost a serious lot of weight, like his skin was all sunken and yellow in his face. He moved all fragile-like too, like if he hammered in a stray nail too hard or something that he might break. The boss talked with him, but I didn't listen in because I don't like being nosy. I asked him what was wrong after we were done for the day. He said that he was fine, and I left it at that. That night, I went home, and for the entire night, my electricity was going haywire. I asked my neighbors if they had noticed anything. I live in a house with units in it, and they said no. I figured I had messed up and not paid my bill or something, and called the electric company. I never did get around to taking apart the box, but the electrician came over and told me that everything was mostly fine. Except when he left, everything started acting funny again. I just shrugged and put on a helmet lamp and read until I was ready to hit the hay. The morning after my night in relative darkness, I was pissing and noticed something on my sink, where I had kept the box. There was black gunky stuff in a square where the box previously was. I smelled it, and to my surprise, it didn't smell a thing like shoe polish. It smelled like that smell after it rains. You know, where there are dead worms on the sidewalk, and everything's all gunky and gross outside. I picked up a sock and wiped it off, and it seemed to take a whole lot more effort than it should have. At work that day, the boss wasn't around, but Shane was in seriously bad shape. Like, I had to help him up the ladder and everything. He seemed to have aged roughly 30 years in 2 weeks. For most of the day, he just sat on the roof shaking and cold. For all his weirdness, he was a pretty good guy, and no one had the heart to tell him to go home. He had helped us all out in a pinch. It was weird, though. He took a cab home like I did. His car wasn't around. It was a piece of shit, though, but I never asked him what happened to it. I got home and my power was acting a little funny again, though I didn't end up spending a night in the dark. The box had been attracting bugs into the cabinet again, through some hole or something. I figured I'd take it apart and see what was inside, just for the hell of it. I used a box cutter and cut through the tape and glue. Nothing. Not a damn thing was in there. I was disappointed in myself, sort of, for wanting to take it apart like that. I felt like a kid mugging a magician to see how he did his tricks or something. I put it back together with my own duct tape and went to bed. The day after it rained, so work was called off, and I spent the day at the gym and doing a little grocery shopping. The box was still on my table from when I had taken it apart and put it back together. At this point, I did a little research online about it, and I hadn't heard any growling or scratching or anything. I just thought, and this sounds stupid even to me looking back, that it was the antique nature of the mirrors that was attracting bugs and making the weird goop and the smell. I spent the night looking at it periodically. The next day, Shane shows up for work, and he doesn't seem to be any better. We're drinking watered-down Gatorade out of the bubbler on the back of a truck, the official drink of the roofer, and he rips a tooth out of his mouth and shows it to me before throwing it on the ground. I asked if he had cancer, because the same sort of thing happened to my mom before she died, and he said no. And again, I left it at that. I got home and I touched the box, and it was hot. Like hot enough to make my fingers hurt, and that's something that hardly ever happens. I accidentally touched a grill and didn't feel anything. It didn't burn or blister or leave any sort of red mark, though, which was weird. Nor was it burning my wooden table at all. When I touched it with my elbow, which doesn't have any nerve damage, it felt like a normal temperature. I chalked it up to dead nerves playing tricks on me. I was getting a little scared of the thing now, like seriously avoiding going home because of the thing. Of course, I would tell myself that an errand needed to be run, or that I deserved to eat at the Olive Garden or something. But that was all bull. I was getting scared to go to bed at night, and it was definitely taking a little toll on me. I'm not a super young guy anymore. It messed me up at work and stuff, not sleeping. Not enough that anyone noticed, but I knew that I wasn't performing as well anymore. Shane couldn't even climb a ladder anymore. We had him doing groundwork, which was basically walking around and picking up the old shingles and putting them in the dumpster. The boss noticed that he was on this, but the dude looked so screwed up that he didn't say anything. He did make him piss in a cup, though, because we have had druggies working for us before, and it never ends well. It was made common knowledge that Shane was not on any sort of drugs. Over the next week, I had nothing to do with the box. Shane's hands were all curled up and useless, like a quadriplegic's, and he was jackknifed and looking at the ground most of the time. At this point, he just shuffled around and leaned against things, and the boss told him to go home. I followed him to his house on a city bus and knocked on his door. It smelled good, though, like those Febreze commercials when they blindfold the people. There were clothes and random knickknacks everywhere. He offered me a beer, and I said yes, and we sat and drank for a little while. No one said anything, so I asked what he was going to do for work. Shane just shrugged. It got awkward after a while, so I got up and started poking around his house. When I got back, he had put on pants, and he was sitting with his thighs real close together, and he pretty much just peed himself. At this point, I excused myself, took the rest of my beer, and went home. The box was still there on my table, and it made another disgusting mark with the rain-smelling goop. The duct tape looked melted at the edges. I took the thing and hurled it against the wall before I could even think of it, and it broke. I got so exhausted that I just went to bed after that. The ordeal with Shane and everything was weird, and I just felt weird. I had some seriously weird dreams that I was a snake, and I was getting pressed under a tile, that lamps were exploding, that my house was getting set on fire. So I went out to a diner. This lady comes over, serves me a coffee, then calls me by name. I walked right out of there and just wandered around for a bit. It was Friday. I didn't want to go back home because I was scared. That night, I saw several raccoons and a giant millipede crossing the road that subsequently got hit by a car. The next morning, this rain-smelling goop was all over the shards of glass and tape that used to be the box. I cleaned it up, bagged the shards with a rock and threw it in the river, Jumanji style. Shane is working at a CVS right now, the street from where he lives now, and he's not actually looking much better, but he doesn't look worse either. I pretend not to recognize him when I go in there, but by the looks of it, he's got a plastic smile, and there's something up with one of his eyes, too. That's basically my tale /X/. I ended up moving because the electrical issues never went away, and actually had to go to court because my landlord thought it was me that caused the whole thing. The case got thrown out, though. Shane's working at the CVS, like I said, and I see him around town, too. I tried dragging one of my friends into the diner, and he said the food sucked, so I didn't pursue it. I don't know. It was pretty strange. I want to know if anyone here knows anything about devil's boxes.
My father bought a music box for my mother 20 years ago. He was on a business trip to Denver, Colorado, and bought one for her and one for me for Christmas. Hers is a blue Merlin-style magician that plays Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera. My mother was never a Phantom fan, and she never wound or played the music box. It sat on a shelf hung on the far wall of the living room, away from general traffic. 13 years ago, it was about Thanksgiving time. The whole family was home. My brother was home from the Navy, my husband and I, and our oldest son, and new 1-month-old. My parents had divorced the year after he bought the box, so he was the only one not there, although he came by later to see my brother. My mother, brother, and oldest son were in the kitchen, my husband was back in the bedroom, and I was sitting on the couch with the baby in the living room, about 15 feet from the music box. Suddenly it started playing. I thought it was a spring that had been wound too tight and just let loose, so I put the baby in his carrier and walked over and picked up the figure. The music box workings are in a clear plastic box in the base. The key wasn't moving, the drum wasn't moving, and the spring was completely slack. The song played, even with it in my hand, for 3 full minutes, and then stopped. We all thought it was very strange, but shrugged it off. My mother passed away in October 2011. Last year, at Christmas, actually on Christmas Eve, it went off again. We were all in the kitchen at least 20 feet away from it. This time my brother walked over to pick it up and brought it over for all of us to see it wasn't moving. It played a little longer, and then I got frustrated with it, looked up at the ceiling and said, "What?" It immediately stopped. Playtime was 2 minutes and 3 seconds, not the full 3 minutes the first time was. Yesterday, I pulled into my driveway, and my husband, holding the music box in the front door, greeted me. It started playing exactly 3 minutes before I pulled into the driveway and stopped as my car pulled to a stop in front of the garage. Again, no movement from the music box mechanical workings, and I've taken the figure apart to see if there was an electronic component that might be causing it. But the figure is hollow, with no electronics.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.